Hi everyone, my name is Geoff Sanford and I'm an oboist with the RPO. While we aren't playing right now and we're staying at home like everyone else, life goes on, and for oboe players that means we still have to keep making reeds. So I thought this would be a good time to make a reed making video to show you the work that goes into making the reeds that we use to play our instrument. So normally the process can take hours, but for our purposes here I'll condense it into just a couple minutes for you. So we start with the raw material, which is tube cane, and this grows mostly in the Mediterranean, but it can grow all over the world. It's very invasive. So I take a razor blade and I cut out a section of it, like that. Normally I would measure it to get the correct diameter, but for time I'm not. But it's too long still, so I have to use a guillotine to cut it to length. And yes, it's called a guillotine for obvious reasons, but it's a little bit less morbid than the real thing. So now we have a piece that's cut to length, but it's too thick, as you can see. So what I have to do is use this machine, which is called a gouging machine, to thin out the middle of the cane. Now there's this little blade in here, and that blade will literally cut the center of the cane out in a symmetrical fashion so that we get an even gouge. And I've got a piece here that I've gouged most of the way for time, but I'll finish it. And you can adjust the thickness of the gouge depending on your personal preferences, but generally we're gouging somewhere in the ballpark of about 0.6 of a millimeter, so we're talking very, very thin. Finish that. Now we're done with the gouger. Now we have to move on, and you can see it's thinner there, move on to the shaping. So for that, we use shaper tip. Now when people hear the term double reed, it's easy to think that we mean two separate reeds bound together. That's not true. So we take one piece and we fold it in half, which I just do over a knife, kind of like that. And I take a little bit off the sides, and I clamp it onto the shaper tip here. And I take a razor blade and I just trim off the sides. And then we end up with a shaped piece of cane. So you can see it's starting to look more like a reed. So now what I do is I need to tie the reed. So we use these little cork and metal staples, is what we call them. And so we put that onto a mandrel to hold it. And I fasten the cane to the staple, about like that. And usually I just eyeball it, but I'll measure the length here. And then we use thread here, which you can see, that I've tied to a clamp. And we just bind it in a particular way. And so you have to make sure that the reed seals on both sides. If you make a reed that doesn't seal on both sides and you go to play it, you get air leaking out the sides of it, and it just doesn't work. So we do that. And I would just go through, and I won't do it right now, but I would go through and tie all the way down the rest of the reed. I'm pointing at the wrong thing. All the way down. And eventually you end up with that. But this is unscraped, so we would have to scrape a pattern into it. And for that, we just use different kinds of knives. And this is the part that can take a little while, so I won't do it fully. But we scrape a very specific pattern into the reed, and that pattern controls how the vibrations enter the reed. And if the pattern is wrong or unequal on both sides, you get a reed that doesn't really function correctly. So we would do a bunch of this. This is probably what you see us doing on stage right before concerts. We're fixing our reed. We're not making a reed, we're just fixing it. So I would take cane off gradually in a symmetrical fashion until eventually we get a fully scraped reed. Now, if you look in the backlight here, see if you can see here. You can see that pattern there. So the very thin tip part takes the vibrations, and then that thicker part right there, called the heart, takes the vibrations and sort of stops them and controls them. And so that pattern that we scrape into the reed gives us a lot of control over how we sound. And if we need to adjust our reed to be flatter, sharper, harder, easier, anything, we can do that. So there are so many variables with reed making that if one variable is off, it can derail the entire process and make it extremely frustrating. But as professionals, we've gotten better at figuring out what's wrong and knowing how to fix it. So that gives us a lot of control when it comes to fixing our reeds. And it's almost like we reinvent our instrument every day. And that's what makes the oboe so cool. So thanks for watching. Hope everyone stays healthy, and we hope to see you back at Kodak all soon.